Damaged by police dial 123, chapter 7, prisoner. Naruto tilted his head just slightly, listening as a breeze played with his hair and playfully tugged his clothes. Kiyomaru stood a few feet away, waiting for him to move. He had seen the blonde stop to listen to something he himself couldn't hear quite often. He didn't ask about it, though. It was Naruto's business. After a minute, Naruto moved to look south. We're heading to Kumo. Kiyomaru only blinked once. They had been heading towards wind, so why change direction to go to lightning? He shrugged inwardly a second later and just followed after Naruto without question. Naruto could feel it on the wind, the screams, the hidden secrets, the smell of blood, the image of a leaf band. He frowned thoughtfully, looking over the large village and then the set of mountains it was nestled in. He and Kiyomaru stepped up to the gate, and two tough-looking guards looked down at him. Hands out, Naruto easily handed his passport over, Kiyomaru following his example. The guards looked over them, noting neither were active or even listed ninja. They handed the passports back and stepped aside. Enjoy your stay in Kumo, one said, and the two walked past. Naruto gave a wide, very exaggerated grin like a child and pulled Kiyomaru along like he was his brother. The guards didn't give him a second glance. Once in an inn, Naruto plopped down on a bed and just sat, concentrating. Kiyomaru followed his example and sat in one of the chairs. Suddenly, a clone appeared next to Naruto, and Kiyomaru was surprised. When he had learned Kagebunshin and without hand signs, Naruto saw his look. Kyubi, he said easily. The bone user knew of the fox. Naruto had told him a few days after he had joined. The clone vanished out the window. 5 minutes later, it stepped back in with a set of maps. It held them out, and Naruto took one, unraveling it. It was a map of the city, mostly of newcomers. There were no important escape routes of buildings on it, just labeled shopping areas, restaurants, markets, and inns. Naruto could get the general layout of the village, though. Naruto studied it, then looked out the window. 2 hours. Kiyomaru just nodded, though he didn't really understand. Naruto slid through the stone corridors like a shadow. As anyone came into view, he faded away. He soon found the door he wanted. He slid into a metal sandbone from his sleeve. He slid a metal sandbone from his sleeve and easily picked the lock. He slid into the room, carefully not to shut the door. He found the target chained to a metal table. Blood stained the table and stone floor. Pale skin had rivers of glistening blood rolling over it. He moved to the man and studied the chains. Then he grabbed the chain and ripped them apart. With brute force, they snapped apart, and he gently scooped the man up. They were gone in a second. Naruto slid from the room and slid back down the halls. He reached the second room. He wished and slid in, gently shutting the door behind him. He set the man on a desk and moved to the drawers. He rifled through them quickly before just stuffing them in a ceiling scroll along with any papers he could find. 2 minutes later, they were in another room, and he was repeating the process. He had just finished sealing the papers when the door clicked shut. He looked up at a huge man with black clothes and wild brown hair. The man smirked at him. Did you think you would really get away, little boy? He boomed in amusement. Naruto looked up at him with his one blue eye. Then in the blink of an eye, he was gone, his kunai sliding through the man's throat. Did you really think I would exchange words? He asked the corpse. Naruto was out of the room with the target in his arms. He soon was clear of the building and was leaping to the wall as he summoned a large number of animals. As they appeared by him on the wall, he threw his arms. Scatter and engage. Return home if they get close to injuring or killing you. The animals scattered. Akira stayed by them though, and Naruto swung on. Kiyomaru leapt over the dead guards and also swung onto the tiger before they were off into the night, heading for the closest forest to get out of the mountains. As they got a good distance away, Naruto put his hands in a sign. Behind them, the building he had been in blew up in flames, and screams rang out. He gave a howl, and 10 wolves and a few other animals responded, making the screams gain volume. Won't say anything, he mumbled as he came into consciousness. It was his mantra. He wouldn't stop it till he died or was rescued. More than 19% chance of the former, so he would repeat it till the end. He didn't know how long he had been captured for, but for all the torture he would not break. Never. He wouldn't. He had to keep any and every secret to himself. He wouldn't even tell them his name, them being the Kumonen. They had captured him for information. He would never give it to them, but he knew he would have to open his eyes soon to see if he was in the cell or the torture room. When Hayate Gecko opened his eyes, he was stopped. Stunned, shocked, bewildered by the sight of a moon and stars. He could feel cool grass beneath his body. and he'd emitting from beside him. He could hear soft mutters notifying him he had company, but all he cared for was the view of the night sky. He couldn't remember the last time he had seen it. He inhaled the fresh air deeply, not caring about the pain in his sides. The air didn't reek of blood. He could only lay there and bask in the peace. Suddenly he felt a hand on his side. He tilted his head to catch sight of a long golden braid with scattered beads entwined in it. A black eye patch, a lone ice blue eye, and whiskered marks. His breath caught as he noticed the lean scratches of the teen and the beauty he showed him. When he recognized him, and for a second time his breath caught. The Cubitan jerky. What was he doing here? He attempted to open his mouth and talk, but a dull rasp limited. He had screamed it hoarse, and only got his mantra out by pure will. His voice failed him now. The boy looked at him, and a blue clashed with his own eyes. When the boy gave a small smile, barely an upturn of lips, he reached for Hayate's hands, and Hayate could only let the boy pick up his limp arms. Metal shackles encased his wrists, and small pieces of broken chain hung from them. The boy, Uzumaki Naruto, if he wasn't mistaken, took the edge of the metal in his hand and tore. Hayate could only stare as the metal shattered and fell from his wrist. The boy repeated the process with his arms and legs. Uzumaki then vanished from his view a moment, only to return with what looked like a pot of water and some cloth. He ever so gently washed Hayate's bloody torn wrists, so gently Hayate almost cried. All his body could remember was the cruelty of interrogation. For a moment the idea of genjutsu fluttered through his mind, but then he realized even they couldn't use a genjutsu with Uzumaki rescuing him. As the teen finished his wrists, he wrapped them in white bandages, then proceeded to wash and rewrap all his other injuries. Hayate lay silent, letting the teen clean his wounds. When the teen finished, he helped Hayate sit up, propping him against the tree. They were close by. Hayate could now see they were in a small clearing. The heat he had felt earlier emitted from a small fire. He was surprised to see another teen in the clearing. This teen looked to be about 14, with bone-white hair, pale skin, eerie green eyes, and some red markings. He could swear he recognized the markings, but his tortured, starved, beaten body couldn't care less about the boy. Only the cup Uzumaki had held up to him. He awkwardly grabbed it with torn, stiff hands. He looked at the watered soup inside. He forced himself to drink it slowly, reveling in the taste, not caring that it burnt his mouth and throat on the way down. When he finished, Uzumaki looked about to give him more than pulled back. Hayate knew, even though he was hungry, that his stomach couldn't take more. Instead, the boy handed him a flask of water. He drank deeply. He relaxed into the tree, and the blonde draped a warm cloak around him. "Rest, Hayate. The wind has whispered your suffering. You need to rest." Hayate didn't even have time to question him as he felt his eyes close and the sense of awareness ebb away. When Hayate woke next, he felt some velvety fur beneath his fingers. He also swayed with the fur, giving him the feeling they were moving. His eyes fluttered open, and he found himself staring down at white fur striped with black. His breath hitched as he looked at the large tiger he sat on. Said tiger was leaping through the trees as swiftly as any ninja, and with the balance of any ninja. He spotted small hands in front of him and followed arms that wrapped around his waist in order to keep him on. He felt soft breath press against his neck and twist slightly to meet the eye of Uzumaki. The boy gave him a studying look. Then he looked forward again. "We'll be in Konoha in a few days. Rest." Hayate felt his consciousness fleeing again and sank into a painless oblivion. Naruto gazed at the large gates as Akira slunk up to them gracefully. Kiyomaru walked beside them, and Hayate lay in his arms, dead to the world. As they reached the gates, the two tuning guards stared at him with dropped jaws and large eyes. They just stepped past the guards. Then they no doubt recognized Hayate and him and would allow Kiyomaru to pass with them. The tiger probably startled them, though. Naruto nudged Akira, and they were off across the roofs, a blur. When they arrived at the Hokage's office, they slipped in the large doors, and the Hokage looked up at them. His eyes widened, and he just stared. Naruto slid off of Akira, and Kiyomaru grabbed Hayate at his signal. Naruto waited for the Hokage to speak and idly straightened the spear on his back. He had wanted it ready in case he couldn't summon it in time, just in case Kumonin caught up. Finally, the Hokage snapped his mouth shut. "Naruto," he breathed. "Hi, Hokage-sama. I've returned like promised from my vacation." I make Kiramaru here on my journey, and he has sworn loyalty to me. We rescue Hayate from a Kumo interrogation room. I healed him as best as I could, and he is fine for now, but you should get a doctor to look after him. The Hokage stared for a second, then he waved a hand, and Anbu leapt from the shadows and grabbed Hayate before leaping outside towards the hospital. The Hokage eyed Akira as he moved around his desk. Naruto caught the look. This is Akira. He's my partner. He comes from the Forest of Death. The Hokage nodded to the tiger, whom in turn did a half bow. And Kiramaru, was it? The Hokage asked. Are you from the Kage clan? Kiramaru sent Naruto a glance, then nodded. And you've sworn loyalty to Naruto? I shall serve him till I die. The Hokage nodded, then walked up to Naruto, smiling. He embraced the boy. It is good to see you again, Naruto. You too, Gigi, Naruto said with a half smile. The Hokage smiled and moved back to his desk. He pulled out a few sheets and quickly began filling them in. When he was finished, he grinned up at them. These forms will put you back in the academy and allow Kiramaru to stay with you. He won't be listed as a Konoha ninja though, as the council will then either make him start his own clan against his will even, or send him on suicide missions. He is now a vassal to the Uzumaki clan. Naruto raised a brow. Uzumaki clan? While you were away, the council tried everything to make you a missing nin. I finally stated that since you were Kushina's son, you had her bloodline, and you were named as Uzumaki, you could be considered the head of the clan. Congratulations. You now have clan protection laws, more freedom, a seat on the council, and the right to have loyal vassals that are not a part of Konoha. Naruto gave a deep smirk as he thought of the possibilities. Oh, and for rescuing one of our Jonin, who is also the last of the Kenjutsu masters and the last of the Hayate clan, I believe you deserve a bonus pay. Naruto's smirk settled into a half smirk or half a smile before he bowed to the Hokage and led Kiramaru out the door as Akira vanished up in a poof of smoke. Kiramaru gazed up at the large tower in surprise and at the large twisted trees surrounding it. This is the place? He asked. Naruto nodded. Kiramaru shrugged inwardly. It was very different from the dark cell he had lived in the Kagyo clan. Pick any room and feel free to look around. I'm going to make some dinner. Kiramaru obviously chose the room next to Naruto. End of chapter 7. Damned by Please Dial 123. Chapter 8, Gratitude. Naruto hummed and he returned to himself as he pulled the last weed from the garden. He had finally worked them up to their glory again. Most of the vegetables that had been able to hand come back every year, and the flowers had spread like weeds. Even if a year and a half had passed, nothing much besides the garden had changed. He smiled slightly at the large potato plants. They had spread well. The flowers had spread through his entire fence of lawn, though he had regretfully had to move them from the entrance of the yard so the hopeful Chunin who stayed and used the tower wouldn't destroy them. When he had arrived, his whole yard had looked like a magical garden. The Forest of Death was as dangerous and creepy as ever, but once you passed his fence, it was a bright bloom of color. It had looked magical. Leafy vines had grown over the wooden fence, making it look like an 8-foot tall wall of leaves and vines. He loved it. More vines had also spread up the tower, as he had planted a whole bunch around the base with the same idea in mind. With a warm climate for a year and a half, they had covered the first floor and were moving on to the second. He had to clear the window areas though, and the door areas. Most of the place had been quite dusty also. A small breeze and open windows had fixed that problem though. He had also made a bunch of clones to watch things and sweep. Then another batch of clones had started to clean out the onsen. Only the arena, the few guest rooms on the first floor, and the one lounge/camera room, all used in training exams, had been relatively clean. Naruto couldn't help but feel a small breeze of joy in his mind and heart as he looked up over his garden, his tower, his forest, his home. Home. He loved it. Naruto gazed at the class, watching him warily. His golden hair was pulled in a messy braid with beads made of silver and glass tied in, even a raven feather tucked in with beads. His black eye patch was lined with an ice blue that matched his lone eye. He now wore plain black shorts, wooden get sandals, his long black coat, which also had ice blue feathers design lining the bottom trim, and a spandex black shirt with whips of ice blue through it like ice under the coat. Lastly, he wore a necklace around his neck. It was some plain string holding a small wooden carved beads to look like feathers and fangs. In his left ear, a wolf fang hung from silver wire. He had He had thinned out a bit more, his body becoming lither. All his muscles were lean but powerful. He was still slightly shorter for his age, but he looked older in body and face, not 14 and a half. His eyes gave the appearance of a hardened shinobi, and his movements was fluid and dangerous. Adorning each cheek were three whiskers like marks, black and elegant in design. His skin was a healthy tone, not pale, but not overly tan. And all in all, he made a beautiful and imposing figure, the kind that attracted attention but could hide in plain sight. He also gave off a dangerous and feral look. None of the academy kids and many others would mess with him. He greeted the class with a curt nod, then moved to sit by Hyuga Hinata as Iruka welcomed him back to the class. As he sat by the shy girl in the last row, he let his coat slip from his shoulders or onto the back of the chair. He heard Hinata give an eep and turned red as she gazed at him. You could see all his muscles through the spandex shirt, but that wasn't what caught most eyes. What caught most eyes were the tattoos on his left arm. They wound around his arm in tight coils all the way to his shoulder. Then on his right wrist was a band of intricate seals. It was about 3 inches thick and done in black and red ink like the other ones. Naruto sent glares at any who stared long. No one was brave enough to ask about the tattoos or where he'd been. Naruto watched the girl over folded hands. She was a nervous little thing, always either fidgeting or staying so still you forgot about her. She was shy and timid too, never meeting anyone's eyes and stuttering when spoken to. She was the exact opposite of any Hyuga he had ever met, but that's what caught his eye. She was different. He watched as the rest of the class streamed out to meet their parents after a day of school. Hinata just hurried off towards her home, no one meeting with her. Within a few seconds he was walking beside her. She gave a startled eep and blushed slightly, pausing and pushing her fingers together. "Can I help you, Naruto?" she asked. He smirked just slightly. A few called him Naruto, kids in the class called him Dope, and the teachers called him Uzumaki. Hinata was braver than she knew. He didn't reply though. She held out a small piece of paper. It had a name and an address. "If you want to be strong." He left it hanging. She took the paper after barely a second of hesitation. She gazed at it in surprise. "Morino Ibiki," she read. He sounds familiar." Naruto just gave a smirk, then vanished towards his forest. Ibiki stared down at the girl in surprise. The small Hyuga Harris had walked up to him a minute ago and asked for training. Now he was looking down and twiddling her fingers. He wondered where the hell she had gotten the courage to ask, and why him? Why not ask another kunoichi to train her? When he had asked, she had told him Uzumaki had told her to ask him. Why the hell did the Gaki tell her to ask him? He knew the Gaki liked to watch his torturing techniques, but telling a girl to come to him specifically for training? The Hyuga Harris at that. There was a moment of silence. Then Ibiki gave a terrifying grin as he chuckled and rubbed his hands together in glee. He'd have to thank the brat for the apprentice. Naruto watched as the months passed. He spent most of the time in his tower with Kimimaro training, gardening, or studying. The days he spent at the academy, he did practically nothing. He just showed up, so he had the minimum day requirement to pass. He didn't do much work though, only enough to pass. He hated when the other kids showed up, especially the Uchiha. Ninja were all about deception. That meant never showing others what you could do. Sadly, few academy students understood. Shikamaru, Shino, Hinata, and he were the only ones to keep low profiles. Hinata had mostly done it out of shyness, but now she did it more out of knowledge. Training with Ibiki had been the right idea for her. In the 6 months she had had the nervousness and shyness beaten out of her with training. You could see the improvements visibly. She now sat straighter, prouder. She also talked without stuttering. Though she was still quiet, she didn't blush as often and would actually step forward to do things once in a while. You could also see the way the head interrogator influenced her by her new clothes. She had nearly given everyone heart attacks when she had changed. She had even shocked her father into silence. Naruto had watched that from his spine points. She now wore her long hair in a braid like his, but tied with a metal clasp that had spikes on it. She wore black shorts that reached her knees and were scattered with pockets. She also wore a tight purple tank top over a long-sleeve fishnet shirt, both showing all of her large breasts. She wore black combat boots with steel-tipped toes. She also had a long black trench coat on with a purple swirl flower on the back. Around her neck, she wore a deep purple choker with with a claw hanging from it. After the first few months after training with Ibiki, Naruto had led her into the forest of death and left her. She had had to fight her way out. When she had emerged, she had been covered in dirt, blood, and bruises. She had come out, though, with a huge deep purple, almost the Black Panther, by her side. Naruto had told her sometimes the animals in the forest chose human partners. She had almost attacked him for embedding her, but then she glared at him and nodded. He had then sat her down and put a panther tattoo on her arm made of ink, her blood, and some of the panther's blood. It was the same as his summoning tattoos, but could only summon that one partner. The tattoo also looked more striking than his symbols, but she had only one. She had only one on a larger space, while he had one. He had an armful. They didn't talk often, but were allies, which was good enough for Naruto. Naruto watched the class with a blank eye as he waited patiently in the shadows of the back seats. Shino hid in the front corner of the door by himself. Hinata hid on the opposite side of Sasuke by the window. Shikamaru hid right in the middle of the class, snoring on his desk. Maybe hiding wasn't the best word. It was more of being guarded or being unseen. Even though they all sat in an open-lit classroom, few could notice them. They had positioned themselves like that on purpose. Were best to hide them. Were best to hide them in plain sight. Naruto hated too much attention, and most of the class knew that from his glares. They just ignored him, though, too wary of him to pay attention to him. He liked it that way. All his musings was interrupted by Iruka as the teacher stepped into the room. As the class settled down, Iruka smiled at them, Mizuki smiling beside him. Today is the final exam. Kids cheered at this. Calm down. We'll begin the day off with the written test. It's worth 20% of the mark. Kids groaned and settled down as Iruka and Mizuki passed the test out. When Naruto got his, he calmly filled out the odd one, purposely not getting any higher than a passing grade. The second part of the exam was weapon training. It was also worth 20%. Naruto took 100% on this, along with Sasuke, Hinata, and Shino. The third part was the taijutsu. Naruto did just enough to get a passing mark, showing off the academy-style basics in the battle against Iruka. The fourth and final part of the test was the academy jutsus. Naruto stood in front of the pair in a room separate from the class, watching both with guarded eyes. Mizuki and Iruka were tallying his other marks to figure out how much he had to do to pass. The three jutsus were worth 40%, together with the others only equaling at 20% each. It used to be you had to know them to pass, but some people couldn't use chakra and they had to change the test. Iruka finally smiled up at him. You need to get at least 2 down masterfully or all 3 adequately. And Naruto gave a sharp nod and pulled his hands together. A moment later, he had switched with the chair. After that, he put his hands together, and in a cloud of smoke, he was a naked girl with small clouds around her privates. Iruka and Mizuki both held their noses as they gawked. Naruto! Iruka yelled. Naruto raised his brow. It is hinged, he pointed out. Iruka worked his jaw before sighing. You are correct, Bunshin. I can't make the Bunshin. Iruka shrugged. He had passed. He tossed Naruto a black Konoha headband. Mizuki sneered, though. That hinge was very inappropriate, and he can't do the simple Bunshin. He failed. Now, Mizuki, it was acceptable, and we said he only had to pass, too. Well, I won't let the demon pass, even if I have to kill him to stop him. He leaped at Naruto, a sneer on his lips, and a kunai in hand as he reached Naruto. Prepared to slit his throat, Naruto moved in a movement too fast for either to see. Naruto's hands erupted through Mizuki's chest, ripping his heart out the other side and splattered the area with blood. Naruto jerked his hand out and let the corpse drop, crushing the still beating heart in his hand. Blood drenched his arm and the edge of his heart and his black coat. Iruka turned a bit pale and clenched his eyes shut. Naruto knew the man had become a teacher to avoid killing, so he calmly walked over to the man and grabbed his arm with a non-bloody hand. He led the man out of the room and led him to his desk. The kids in the class had gone absolutely silent at the sight of blood-drenched arms, the bloody fingerprints. Iruka collapsed in his seat and took calming breaths. Naruto just moved to the window and drew some of his own blood across the seal on his arm. A large raven appeared in a burst of smoke and took off for the Hokage's tower. Naruto had told the old man he would send a raven whenever anyone died by his hands, unless on a mission. 5 minutes later, Anambu came to retrieve the body and Naruto's report. Iruka also gave his report. The masked man grabbed the body and was gone. The Raven who had led him here gave Naruto a call and vanished in a plume of smoke. When he was gone, the testing started again. As Naruto sat down, everyone scooted away, giving him as much room as possible. He hadn't bothered to wash the blood off his arm. Team 7 is Uchiha Sasuke, Haruno Sakura. Haruka was cut off by a cheer from Haruna and Uzumaki Naruto. You're under Hatake Kakashi. Haruno quieted instantly and everyone sent her pitying looks. Sasuke sent Naruto a smirk that said, I'm better than you, so you'd better not pull me down. He hated Uchiha, arrogant, boastful, show-off, no sense of secrecy or modesty. He didn't even think there was someone out there better than him. Fool. Team 8 will be Inuzaka Kiba, Abura Mashino, and Hyuga Hinata under Yuhi Kurenai. Team 9 is still in circulation. Team 10 will be Narushikamaru, Yamanaka Ino, and Akamichi Choji under Sarutobi Asuma. Congratulations. Kids instantly burst into cheers. Naruto gave an amused smirk. They weren't even aware that by tomorrow only 3 teams would be left, while the rest would be either sent back to the academy or pulled from the program. Didn't they notice there were never more than 3 rookie getting teams, sometimes even less? Take last year, for example, only 1 getting team. They were in for a disappointment shock. End of chapter 8.